Welcome to the latest episode of Star Cells and God. This is the show where we discuss new discoveries taking place at the frontiers of science and describe how these discoveries provide evidence for God's existence, God's nature, and the reliability of Scripture. My name is Rana. I'm a biochemist and Christian apologist, and I'm joined today in studio by Dr. Jeff Zweerink, who is an astrophysicist and a Christian apologist. We both work for an organization called Reasons to Believe, which sponsors this podcast. If you want to know more about Reasons to Believe, go to our website, reasons.org. Also, you can follow us on social media, RTB_official. Also, I would love for you to go to our YouTube channel, Reasons to Believe 1, subscribe, and you can get access to all kinds of great videos that give you different insights into the science-faith dialogue. Also, make sure that you use the notification button so that you are alerted the next time a new episode of Stars, Cells, and God drops. Also, I want to make sure that you stay tuned because we have an exciting announcement in the middle of this program. So you want to make sure that you don't bail on your viewing a little bit too early. All right, Jeff, let's go ahead and get started today. You're going to be talking about CO2 removal.
I will be doing that
and
eventually.
I'm going to be talking about Neanderthal engravings. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
So I apologize ahead of time. Do you like to listen to music? Is that something you enjoy doing? And if so, what's your favorite musical genre?
I do like listening to music, but I am odd in the things that I like, or the things that I like are the things that I'm familiar with. So if you ask me what my favorite group is, it's a group called Harvest. It was a Christian group from the 70s, 80s, probably 80s and 90s more likely. But that's the group that I listen to. But really, the music that I like is the music that I know. So I have to be careful what I listen to. But
yeah.
I know you're a little different in that.
Yeah. I love music. I love to explore different genres, but still probably my favorite musical genre would be the blues and Americana. Just love that particular sound.
Why so? What about that as opposed to like rock or rap or something?
It's very down to earth and a lot of times primal. Right, and I think it really captures the American experience.
Okay,
those two genres. So
it sounds there's part of that that's the musical experience, and part of that is the emotion or the story that it brings with it. So okay,
but like you, I also like that which I'm familiar with, and I grew up in the late '60s, early '70s, so I also listened to quite a bit of classic rock too.
All right,
just because that's the sounds that I'm familiar with, and
they're making a comeback because I notice a lot of people that my kids are at school and stuff, and they're coming home and listening. I'm like, I knew this song.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, we really did grow up with the best music, I guess. So. But, one of the quintessential classic rock groups is The Who, right?
Okay.
And this is an album cover from 1978. This is the Who Are You album cover. And this is significant because this was the last album that Keith Moon played on before he tragically died.
Okay.
But The Who was, formed in 1964. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sold 100 million records, and were considered to be really influential. Many people actually see them as the inspiration for punk rock, believe it or not. And anyway, off this album, Who Are You, is perhaps their most popular single, at least in North America, which is Who Are You, right? Mm-hmm. And I think almost everybody...
I know that you put the lyrics and I'm like, who?
Yeah. Almost everybody knows the song, and it was actually the theme to one of the CSI, TV series. And it's an interesting story about the nature of the song or the inspiration for the song. It was written by Pete Townsend, and apparently he had spent the day in Tin Pan Alley, which is the part of London where all the record studios are.
Oh, okay.
And then after the long day, he went to a bar and met up with two members of the Sex Pistols who really admired him, even though he was at that time much older than them, because of his inspiration for the punk music scene.
Gotcha.
he ended up getting smashed, passed out on the streets of London in a doorway in an area called Soho, and then was awakened by a police officer who recognized him and said, "Look, if you can, get up and walk away, you're not going to go to jail." And so he wrote a song about that experience.
All right.
But what he asked the police officer when he woke him up was, "Who are you?"
Okay.
And so that's where the lyrics come from, But when you think about it, that question, even though in that case it was rather a mundane question, but when you think about it, that question is actually really profound, right? Who are you, right? Who are you? Who am I, right? And it's a question that not only I think people of a more philosophical bent might ask, it's also a question that scientists ask. Who are we as human beings, and who are Neanderthals, right? And
so it's transitioned from the individual to collectively. What are we as? I think that is a profound question. So
right, yeah. And so I don't think that's what Pete Townsend meant, but it is a profound question. And today, one of the questions that fascinates anthropologists is, who are Neanderthals? Who are you, Neanderthals? We really want to know who you are, but it's a question that also interests just the lay public, right?
Right.
People are fascinated with Neanderthals because it raises questions again about who are we as human beings? Were Neanderthals like us? How did we relate to Neanderthals? Are we exceptional? What do Neanderthals tell us about who we are as human beings? A lot of people are interested in that, and of course, Christian apologists, particularly those that are involved in the science-faith conversation, are very interested in Neanderthals too, right? Because from an evolutionary perspective, Neanderthals are considered to be a sister species to us, where presumably about 800,000 years ago, there's an ancestral group that we diverged from, where one branch led to Neanderthals, one led to modern humans. And, there are questions. Did Neanderthals have symbolic capabilities like us? Did they have advanced cognition like us? Were they like us? If so, then for Christians, well, are Neanderthals descendants of Adam?
Right, yeah.
Right. And
I think your point in there, or the comment you just made, often is missed. And had I not been around you, I wouldn't have known it so well. Is there's the prevailing idea that Neanderthals are just the group of people we descended from, or they're further back in that chain of people that we descended from. But if I get what you're saying, and I've talked to you enough, that it's not like, Neanderthals are our ancestors. They look like us, or there are similarities, but they're not in our lineage, even if you take an evolutionary perspective,
right,
correct?
Right, yeah. They're a side branch.
Right.
But the thought is that, well, if Neanderthals were like us, if they had symbolic capabilities, if they had advanced cognition, then it means that ability in us as humans isn't that unique or special.
Gotcha.
And it must have either arose independently 2 separate times in our lineage and Neanderthals' lineages, or it may have actually originated in the ancestral group that gave rise to humans and Neanderthals.
Gotcha.
So from a Christian perspective, how do we make sense of Neanderthals in light of the biblical account of human origins? Did they have the image of God? Were they in Adam like us? Were they the victims of original sin? These are all questions that theologians and biblical scholars and Christians who are scientists engage in.
Well, and there's Christians have different perspectives on this. I know our position is Neanderthals were remarkable creatures who were not humans, who went extinct before. Well, not extinct before. Went extinct a long time ago and are not part of the human ancestry. But there are other Christians who will argue they're all part of the human lineage. In fact, they are humans. They're not even something separate. So.
Right. Yeah. And so a discovery that I want to talk about today deals directly with that question. Who are Neanderthals? Were they like us or not?
I'm curious, before you move off of this picture, these are pictures presumably of Neanderthal reconstructions, all of them, correct?
Yes.
Because they do look remarkably human. Is that I know enough imagery in science is
Yeah.
imagery as opposed to reality. Is this fairly accurate, or what's your assessment?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate, I think. The people that do this kind of work, are trained in doing facial reconstructions
Okay.
as part of crime scene investigations. So they take that that insight, that knowledge, that experience, and they painstakingly apply it to Neanderthal skulls and try to reconstruct what they think they would have looked like. Plus, using insight from genetics and things like that to like the blue eyes, the ginger hair.
So this really does lend credence. I mean, you look at this image and you say, I can see why you're asking the question, what do you do with who are Neanderthals?
Yeah, I mean, it's very familiar. They're very familiar looking.
Yes.
Right, yes, indeed. And so the paper I want to talk about was published recently, just a few days ago. We were recording this towards the end of June. Last week it was published in a journal called PLOS One, and it's a large international team of collaborators, primarily French scientists, that claim to have discovered evidence for Neanderthal engravings that are older than 50,000 years in a cave system found in the central part of France. Okay. And they argue that this is unequivocal evidence that Neanderthals were making deliberate markings on cave walls, and that this raises questions about were these deliberate markings evidence of symbolism or proto-symbolism? Was this the first evidence of Neanderthal art that's unequivocal? Okay, so it's a very important claim they're making.
There's kind of two questions. One is, I guess three questions. One, are they Neanderthal driven? Two, are they intentional? And three, are they art or something? So, so there are three separate. Yeah. You can answer one and two and have it not be art necessarily.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And just for a little background, this is the cave that we're talking about is the Roche-Cotard cave in the Loire Valley of France, again, the central part of France, and the cave site is on a river system. So this map shows the red square where the cave is, and this is more of a blow up of that particular region. Now, the history of the cave opening is rather interesting. It was discovered in 1846, when people were excavating this site, the cave opening was discovered, and it was buried underneath a bunch of sediment. And the research team actually took 50 measurements of the sediment samples from the exterior towards the interior, and determined that this burial was probably about 57,000 years ago using optically stimulated luminescence techniques.
Burial, are you talking intentional burial, or are you talking, this is just when the cave, something came and sedimented the cave?
I mean, it's by a river system, so the thought is that the river overflowed and went into the cave entrance and carried with it a lot of sediment. And that ended up burying the opening, and it remained sealed until 1846 when the opening was uncovered through excavation efforts. And people have been into the cave several times studying the interior of the cave and have found large animal remains, no Neanderthal remains, but Neanderthal artifacts. Right. So this has been a heavily studied site. And this is showing the cave system. So this is called the LRC1, the La Roche-Cotard Cave 1 system. And there's an entrance there that goes into what's called the Mousterian Gallery. This is a place where they've uncovered Neanderthal artifacts that are Mousterian, that are uniquely attributed to Neanderthal activity. It's in a layer called the U4 layer, which dates about 65 to 90,000 years in age. There's no evidence that modern humans were in this site. And in fact, if the cave sealed up at 57,000 years ago, modern humans weren't in Europe at that time. So
we hadn't migrated to Europe?
No, about 45,000 years is where the most significant earliest migration took place. There's some evidence humans might have been in Europe at 50,000, 55,000 years ago. still disputed, and
Right.
it wouldn't have been a large human presence.
So
modern human-
that's somewhat of the value of this being 50+ thousand years ago when it was sealed up, is anything before that had to be something other than humans.
Right, right. And again, we have evidence for Neanderthal occupation. There's also the LRC 2, 3, and 4 sites where you also see Neanderthal artifacts. So this is clearly a Neanderthal site. And as you go into the cave, there is something they call the Lemmings chamber that goes into the pillar chamber. And in the pillar chamber, this is where the engravings have been found. And that blue line shows the wall on the cave where the engravings were made.
Okay.
And it wasn't just a single panel, but actually multiple panels. So this is showing that back wall of the pillar chamber, and the blue areas correspond to where the different engravings were made. And these engravings were made with fingers that were rubbed across soft areas in the wall. Those areas were made out of tuff, volcanic ash, which is a softer material that would allow humans to make impressions.
Do you have a scale for this? I mean, it's a picture. What's the size of the opening?
Yeah. Well, the engravings are somewhere between 4.5 to about 6 feet off of the ground.
Okay.
Well, 1.5 to 1.7 meters. So that'd be 4.5 to maybe 5 feet off the ground.
Okay.
6 feet's probably too high. That's about where they are in terms of the size. In terms of the size of the engravings, I'm not sure how large each of those areas is, but these are just some samplings of some of the panels. And so the top shows you the actual, again, engravings, and then below is an artistic depiction of pencil sketches of what they saw there.
Okay.
And you can actually see some blue lines. Those are made by animals that were in the cave that were marking the wall. And so they distinguish animal markings from the markings of modern humans. And some of them show some interesting geometric shapes. Whether these are intentional or accidental, is hard to know.
Right.
And here's so these, you can, and then this is another one showing, again, the markings. And then the one over on the right-hand side are these spots on the wall that they think were deliberately made by human activity. And there's even places.
You mean Neanderthal activity?
Sorry, that's what I meant, Neanderthal activity. And there's actually percussion sites on some of the walls where somebody was hitting the wall with some kind of object.
Okay.
And so, to me, the fact that this has been sealed up and the dates are, older than 57,000 years, and you have clear evidence for Neanderthal occupation between 65 and 90,000 years ago, these are probably made in the approximately 70,000 year time window. It looks like it is deliberate activity. They've done a very detailed analysis of the engravings to demonstrate that these were produced by Neanderthal fingers.
I'm curious. I mean, not that I doubt that. I'm just kind of curious. How do you know that? Because one of the thoughts running through my head,
right?
Just seeing things cold for the first time is, you got water running into the cave.
Right.
Do you have branches or sticks or stuff rubbing? I mean,
right.
There could be. I could envision other scenarios. How do you come across and say, oh yeah, these are fingers that have done this?
Yeah, it's from the depth of the grooves.
Okay.
And the width of the grooves, as well as the angles in the grooves. So, so like a bear's claw would give you very different depth, width, and angles.
Okay.
So that's how they're
so
doing.
You're in essence figuring out what's the size, what's the shape of the thing that engraved it. So in principle, you could say, all right, well, sticks that are the size of fingers might give the same thing. But there's other reasons to think this is actually not sticks rubbing on it. So, okay.
I mean, to me, it looks like, indeed, these are engravings that were intentionally made.
Gotcha.
Right? And it looks like the only explanation is that these were done by Neanderthals. So that's kind of answering those first two questions.
Right.
now the question is, what is the purpose of these engravings, right? And so some people have suggested maybe this is proto-symbolism. Actually, the authors of the paper are pretty conservative.
Okay.
It's like we don't know what the purpose is. Is this symbolic? Is this proto-symbolic? Other anthropologists who've looked at this publication who weren't involved in the study have said, look, this doesn't seem like it is communicating anything that would be communally understood. It's probably something that's one-off. It's really hard to argue that this has any meaning beyond the fact that it was intentionally made. I've had, dogs that would scratch furniture, right? And you wind up with, it was an intentional act.
Yeah. But it's not messaging other dogs coming through.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But this is also on the heels of.
I am curious before you go move on. So, it seems like there's a fair bit where it's hands being moved across. It also sounds like there's this place where there's a bunch of wrapping. That strikes me. Do you know where in the cave this is? Because that sounds, I could envision that very easily being, okay, I've got a rock pounding on the wall because I want to know, is there anything deeper in the cave type stuff?
Yeah. Well, it all goes, I'll go back. It all goes.
Okay. Well, go ahead. If that.
No, it's not that. Yeah, this is the blue area is the area of the cave where the engravings.
Okay, so you're relatively deep into the cave then.
Yeah,
enough that you're probably not getting a lot of direct light at that point in time.
Yes,
okay.
Most likely that's the case.
Okay.
Now, this discovery follows on the heels of another discovery a few years ago now in a place called Gorham's Cave, which was in Gibraltar. And on the floor of the cave, these markings were estimated to be about 39,000 years in age, are these hatch marks on the floor.
Okay.
And this is, again, a Neanderthal cave, and so presumably Neanderthals produced this. Now, there is evidence that humans were in Gibraltar at about that time, so this could have been.
So Gibraltar is where, just for
in Spain.
In Spain, okay.
So it's off,
Spain.
On the coastal area.
Substantially separated from where we're dealing with here, then.
This is France.
Spain. No, okay. So it's still European continent. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So it's not that far away.
Okay.
Now, and again, people have argued, well, is this symbolism or proto-symbolism? Is this art? Again, if you say this is Neanderthal activity, it's intentional, but is it really communicating anything artistic? I think that really, or is it symbolic? That really is a stretch that I don't think anybody has established. And again, the people that published this work were pushing the idea of symbolism.
Right.
The people that have published the engraving work are much more circumspect about how far to draw the conclusion. But we should compare this with art that was produced by the first humans that were in Europe. That it's unequivocal humans. This is from a site in France called the Cusack Cave, and this was discovered a few years ago, and it consists of a large number of engravings that are actually quite massive in size. Some of the engravings are on the order of 12 meters in size. And those
are engravings, or it looks like that's where whatever you're looking at, the white stuff is projecting out.
No, but that's right. Yeah, so it's engraving. A lot of times I think it actually is. It's an illusion. It is going in.
Okay.
But these engravings are actually pretty sophisticated in terms of depicting, real life animals that they would have encountered, and this is just a small portion of something called the Great Wall. And this is an outline,
right? Yeah,
that to kind of show the types of animals that are being depicted here. But again, this is an extremely large panel, and there's a huge number of these engravings in this cave, and it's in a chamber that's so deep that the anthropologists that are studying it can only be in that chamber for 2 or 3 hours before they have to come up because the CO2 levels are so high. So this is, this is dated somewhere between 30 and 40,000 years. I don't recall off the top of my head. I'm thinking it's either 33 or 36,000 years ago.
Right.
So it's more recent than the engravings,
Right.
but look at the difference, right?
Yes.
This is a profound difference. Or here, these are called hand stencils, and this is I'm from a cave system someplace in Europe. I don't know off the top of my head, but we've also discovered these in caves in Asia that are older than cave art that's in Europe, and it's identical in terms of character. So presumably humans had this capability before we even left Africa 60, 70,000 years ago.
Right.
These hand stencils are pretty sophisticated. In one case, the human artists were taking pigment, which is probably manganese oxide, iron oxide, maybe charcoal that's slurried, putting their hands in it and then pressing their hands against the wall. Those are called positive imprint hand stencils. The negative ones, which are white, they would put the hand against the wall and use some kind of blowing device in which they would blow the pigment on top of their hands and then remove it. And some people think that these stencils actually had religious experience where the cave walls were separating the physical realm from the spiritual realm, and that by putting their hands on the wall, it was a way in which they were trying to connect with the spiritual realm. That's one interpretation that makes sense when you think about, this is from David Lewis Williams, when you think about everything that he discusses with regard to cave art. But the point is that here again you have hands that are involved in producing the art, but look at how sophisticated this is compared to the finger flutes that we see in the La Roche-Cotard cave.
That's what strikes me. I mean, this is in some sense a very simple form of art. I mean, all you're doing is doing hands and stuff, but the knowledge of knowing how to do that, and I mean, obviously this wasn't this happened once. It was there's a lot of forethought that goes into this. I'm still not sure what to think of the drawing. The indentations from the Neanderthals, but it's just qualitatively, it's like the other one's like, those are marks. This is there's something going on here.
Right, and just one final point, and then I can bring this to a close, is something that we have to consider too when we try to interpret what we are seeing in these cave walls is the brain biology of modern humans and Neanderthals.
Okay.
And we've talked about this quite a bit, but modern humans had about the same brain size as Neanderthals. Maybe Neanderthals had a slightly larger brain size, but the shape of the brain was really very different, where humans had, because of the globular nature of the brain that was forced from the globular nature of the skull and the flat face compared to Neanderthals, have overdeveloped parietal lobes compared to Neanderthals. And there's other brain areas too that are much larger in humans that are involved in integrating different activities in the brain. Neanderthals had a much larger eye socket, and that there's a correlation between the size of the eye socket and the size of the size of the brain devoted to vision. So Neanderthals probably had greater visual acuity than we do as modern humans, but that means more of their brain is devoted to processing visual information, which takes away from other areas of the brain that are involved in cognition. And then there's been a couple of episodes of Star Cells and God where we talked about Neanderthal genetics, and Neanderthal genetics also indicates differences in the brain capacities of Neanderthals versus modern humans. So
it looks like from this image that, at least in terms of volume, there's kind of similar volumes between Neanderthals and humans. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, you also see that there's a very different shape between the two. So I'm gathering that's important also.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. I mean, that's where you because when you try to begin to look at the brain shape that would result, you end up seeing, again, this leads to an overdeveloped parietal lobe in humans compared to Neanderthals.
And the parietal lobe is what's up in the front?
It's in this part of the brain.
Okay, kind of off to the side.
Yeah,
okay.
But it's the part of the brain that's involved in for example, in these activities, perception of stimuli and sensory motor transformation, visual spatial integration, imagery, self-awareness. So this is
Right.
not insignificant. So the larger point that I'm trying to make is that there is data from brain structure of Neanderthals, from Neanderthal genetics, that suggests Neanderthals were cognitively inferior to us, that they didn't really have the capacity to make art. It would be surprising if they were making art. So in other words, when we interpret things like these cave engravings attributed to Neanderthals or the hatch marks, it's not to say Neanderthals didn't have intelligence, emotional capacity, that they weren't remarkable in their own right. But I think it's legitimate to say, look, they probably didn't have the capacity for symbolism, for language and art in the way that we have those capacities. And I think that the ability to represent the world symbolically is a quality that we would have that probably most closely links or connects to the image of God, right?
Yeah.
So to me, I think this discovery is interesting. It makes Neanderthals that much more fascinating, when we ask who are they, right? But at the same time, I don't think this challenges the notion of human exceptionalism. It doesn't undermine our view that humans uniquely bear God's image and that Neanderthals were intelligent creatures that lack the image of God.
Well, and your discussion just kind of reminds me, I've been paying cursory attention. I mean, this is much more your field of study than mine, but cursory attention. And just kind of, this question is, okay, what is it that humans do that distinguishes us from other animals? And we've had a list of criteria. We make tools, we bury our dead, various things. And clearly those are things that humans do. But, I think Hugh has a very insightful realization that there are different kinds of animals. There are life that's living, there's life that's social, and there's life that's spiritual. And not getting into the, bipartite, tripartite. I think that's not the discussion I'm interested in. But if we're social animals, social animals do certain sets of things. Spiritual is something else. And so that's what it seems to me you're trying to get at. The question to me is not, is this remarkable? I mean, it's remarkable what the Neanderthals were doing. But to me, the question is that best explained by social behavior, or is it explained by religious or spiritual behavior? Right. And, the fact that you see other sorts of things. I mean, you got bear markings on the wall, whether that's intentional or not. I guess, so there's a place to distinguish there. But, your images where you're looking at, here's Neanderthal markings compared to here's human markings, they're just in a different category.
Yeah.
All that to say, I agree with your picture that this really kind of seems to be saying, given what we know across Neanderthals, not just with the markings, but with the markings and brain size and, it really does make sense that there is something very different about us, and that these are not signs of that thing that distinguishes humanity. So
fun stuff, though.
It is, and I have to say, the more I have, listened, we did the Human Exceptionalism Conference. The more I've listened to people, the creatures on this earth are just fascinating. I mean, what God has done in creating them. Yes, we have this capacity to relate to God, but what He's put in the creatures are just incredible.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff, before we get into the next segment, we have a special first look at something we've been working on for quite some time here at Reasons to Believe.
It is, Fuzz. This is something I started working on 3 years ago on our preliminary version, so I'm excited to see it come out now.
Yeah, we've got an Ask RTB app version 2.0 coming out. And today, more than ever, people are searching for answers. And here at Reasons to Believe, we do have answers, lots of them. And our desire is to help equip you with the tools that you need to always be ready. So today, we're happy to share with you our new and improved Ask RTB app.
Well, and this app takes the answers that RTB has, simple, concise answers, and mixes it with a search engine so that you can find the answers to the questions you need very quickly. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how it works, Fuzz?
It's pretty simple, actually. To begin with, you just enter your question into the search bar, and almost instantaneously you will receive brief written answers. These answers are pulled directly from our catalog of research, so you know you can trust the results.
Well, in addition to that, to the short answers, you'll also get short, engaging videos that help equip you as well, and even suggestions that will help you take a deeper dive. So I'm really thrilled for people to get this into their hands. When are they going to be able to get it?
Reasons to Believe is happy to announce that on September 6th, so make sure you mark your calendars, people will be able to download this free app onto their smart device. We also invite you to go to reasons.org/AskRTB to learn more. The beautiful thing about this new tool is the support that it's going to receive. Over the next several months, more resources will be added to it to create an even more robust user experience. So bring your questions and grow your faith. Now, on to our next topic on stars, cells, and God.
So I've got a little shorter discovery. I've got talking about carbon dioxide removal. You have to have been dead or some other form of incoherent and incapacitated to not realize that there's this concern we have about human activity increasing the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. And not that that in and of itself is a problem, but because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, that serves to increase the temperature of the Earth. And this has been a topic that largely, when I first started getting into Christian apologetics, which would have been about 20 years ago, this almost wasn't even on the map as something that was significantly discussed. I'm sure there were people talking about it, but it wasn't a driver of the conversation like it is today. And I've just kind of seen how, as we've gone along, that there's this recognition, growing scientific knowledge. Okay, yes, there are these things that are changing the temperature of the planet, concerns about global warming. And largely, my assessment is that the discussion has been driven not primarily by the science, but about the political ramifications. Good, bad, or other, the moment Al Gore made that a political platform, it made it really hard to have a discussion of what's actually going on, and is this something that we as Americans and even global citizens need to be worried about, or is this who has power in the United States type thing? And so, my interest in this discussion is how do we get this out of the political and into the, is it a big deal and what do we do about it?
Right.
As I began thinking about it, I realized there were kind of 4 questions to me that are related to this. 1, is the globe warming? 2, are humans a cause of that? 3, how big a deal is it? And 4, what do we do about it? And it seems like there's the what do we do about it has driven the conversation, because politically that's where you can do things. But, I think the answers to those other 3 questions are critical in order to decide what to do about it. And so, I think the scientific data is pretty convinced, yes, the globe is warming. I don't know how you get around that. That just seems to be where the scientific data lies. I think that second question, are humans causing it? I think, yes, humans are definitely part of the equation. I had that discussion 5, 6, 7 years ago, somewhere between 20% and 80%. Where that number is, you can't get around that humans are a significant part of what's going on. 20% significant, 80% significant, but clearly human activity is a driver in this. Excuse me. Third question is, how important is it? And I still, if I'm honest, I don't know that I have a good answer to this. I do know that the globe is going to get warmer. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I think it's reasonable to say there are some consequences, and the consequences are big enough that even if we're unsure whether that's what's going to go on, I think it's important to consider. But
rising sea levels, loss of coastal areas.
Yes, and I mean, there is a part of that where you say, the Earth changes, you kind of adapt to it. And so that's where how big a deal is it, and what do we do about it? Because, some of what we value is because of where we've invested our resources, and we may just have invested our resources in a bad place. I mean, at a first level, if coastal sea levels go up, that damages a lot of infrastructure in New York, increasingly in Florida. That may not be, it may just mean we made a bad choice in building a whole bunch of stuff there, though. We didn't have a long-term enough view of things because it may be, given time, it was going to happen anyway. And I see that in where we build. The more we can kind of tame the environment, the more we tend to build places that we might not be the greatest place to live. And I grew up in the Midwest, and for a long time, people built in the floodplains because it's cheap land, it's easy to work on, and every 100 years it floods. And if you're far enough away from a flood, it seems pretty attractive. But if you have a big enough picture, you manage that much better. And I think we do a much better job managing that sort of development now. But, you look at the skyscrapers in New York and things like that. Those are long enough term structures that they may be encountering our lack of foresight. And that's not – there's so many ways people could hear that as callous, but it's just saying if we're going to do things well, we need to understand how things work. But what I wanted to focus on today was one of those fourth options is that, okay, we've got carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know you can calculate how much human activity is producing carbon dioxide. I think it's a little harder to figure out how the Earth system deals with all that carbon dioxide, but I think we're getting a much better handle on that as well. But one of the questions you can say is, okay, so we're producing carbon dioxide. Are there technologies we have, or could we implement technologies that would allow us to remove that carbon dioxide? Mm-hmm. And I see this very much in the class of thinking that Hugh has mentioned, that if God is the creator of the earth, the creator of the universe, creator of earth, creator of us, then the solutions that are out there will both benefit, or there are good solutions that will benefit humanity and the planet. Mm-hmm. And so I see this potentially in that class. But I do think it's worth being a little cautious of. And if you could, I got a little diagram just of the ways that people think about removing carbon dioxide. And there are, ocean fertilization. That's the idea where you seed the ocean with nutrients. Organisms there grow, they consume the carbon dioxide, they get deposited on the ocean floor, basically remove the carbon dioxide down to the ocean floor. All of these are kind of have some sort of mechanism like that. You've got ocean direct capture. That's where you're taking the water there and removing the carbon dioxide. The direct air capture is kind of the one I want to talk about because that's the most the most direct source of carbon dioxide, because that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere does get incorporated into other things. But if we can extract it directly from the air, then presumably that's a little bit more natural balance of what the Earth system was working on. And I think that's kind of the idea behind it. And, I do think there are lots of different options here. One that I thought was an interesting that comes up in the article I'm going to talk about was biochar. And that's where you just heat biomass up in a very oxygen-poor environment, and it ends up becoming very carbon dense. And so you get this biochar, which, so it's carbon dense, it's removing carbon dioxide by doing that, and then you can now go out and spread this on the ground, and it actually increases the capacity of the ground to grow stuff. When you look at this in terms of a CO2 removal mechanism, though, you're making the biochar, and then you're spreading it out on the ground, and it gets oxidized probably on the order of a decade, maybe a few decades. So is that really carbon? You're removing it, but you're just delaying it, if you will. It's not really a solution, if you will. But this article is talking about how carbon dioxide removal is getting credibility, for one, and to kind of give you a scale of the challenge that it is to date, we've removed about 10,000 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. 10,000 tons is no small amount. It's estimated that we need to remove 5 to 10 billion tons a year. So, big problem. That's really what it's saying there. And even in the article, they were talking about what sorts of things do you need. Well, so that what the aim is to find a way to remove carbon dioxide. And remove it from the air, transport it to a permanent, and put it in a permanent being at least 100-year storage facility, and facilities deep underground and in natural aquifers or places where you can store it, stuff like that. So it's complicated, and there's no single way of looking at it. But what they're looking for is to be able to remove at $100 a ton and store for 100 years or more. Now think about, just do the calculations there. $100 a ton, and you've got 5 to 10 gigatons a year. Your $100 billion to $1 trillion a year is devoted to carbon dioxide. So this is not a small task, and that's really all I was getting at. Whether you can ever get it down to $100 or not, that's the game. Right. That's the aim they set, and even if it's doable, it's still a major cost. Right. And so part of my discussion in this and wanting to talk about this is just to illuminate the scale of the challenge we're talking about. But I also have kind of almost a philosophical question related to this, because we're talking about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, either from the water, whatever. We need to get rid of, 10 gigatons a year and then deposit that somewhere. Now, wherever you're depositing is now you're going to increase the concentration of it. This is the same sort of idea with desalinization. You're out there on the ocean, you're bringing water in, you're taking some of the salt out, you're extracting the water. You can put the salt back in large part because the oceans are so stinking large. Right. You can do a lot of that, and it's got to be an inconsequential effect. Right. But I'm not so sure that is the right way to look at it, because you can look at the way we've developed the technology that now we're so concerned about producing so much carbon dioxide is, the first car, even if it's just making a bunch of smoke, that smoke is an insignificant amount of the atmosphere that's out there. You make it more efficient, everything like that. These little things, when you add it up, or when you're now talking about we've got to do it on a global scale, that's where you start to have the problem. So what was, building factories so that we can produce food and make things for more people and make people's lives better, and cars so that we can move around and see the world, all of this technology was benign and had a very small contribution to what was going on. But now we found, after 150 years of doing this, that the contribution wasn't as negligible as we thought. And I kind of just have that question about all of these sorts of technologies. Is they're predicated on, we're going to take this, put it somewhere. Yes, it's a small amount, but we're going to put it somewhere. 5 to 10 gigatons a year over a century is 1 trillion tons. Yeah. Of whatever you're doing. And that's probably going to have some sort of significant effect on wherever you're doing that. And I guess, even coupled in with that is all of this has to be pretty close to natural technology, if you will, because you can't use motors and engines to do this, because you need energy to do that. Where are you going to get it? Unless if we're going to find, many of the ones that have become pretty close to successful, there was one that was part of its process. It could use the energy from the nuclear power plant to do one part of it, and it needed heat from a different plant. So it relied on the technologies. Nuclear fuel, I think, actually is doing very well greenhouse gas wise. There's another cost to that, though, which is the spent radioactive fuel. And so thinking about this in a global perspective, I wonder, might we, if we don't understand well, might we just be making another bigger problem later? Right. Because if let's just say we inject a significant amount of this down into underground caverns, do we know that this isn't going to seep up and get into, migrate up through things and change the acidity of the soils or something? We might find 100 years down the road, what we thought was a good solution turns out to be causing another problem that we hadn't thought about. Right. In the same way, making cars and automobiles and factories ended up producing this problem that there's no reason anybody had a chance to be worried about that until later. And so, there's part of me that I look back at that and say, or I sit and look at that and it seems intractable in some sense. I don't think that's the case. But I also think it's just, to me, where I draw hope in this is that I don't think, I draw hope from this from a theological perspective, that God has created this earth, and the idea that we're able to inadvertently undermine what God has designed this earth to do is that seems to be a bad way to look at it. That doesn't mean I don't have to pay attention, but to think that just by accident, and I think you could argue that we've been a little bit careless, but that without extreme intent that we can just accidentally destroy or by neglect destroy what God has created. That seems to be, as a global scale, a bad way to look at things. The flip side of that is that, yes, God created this earth, and I think it's incredibly well designed, but he's also given us stewardship of the earth. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we don't have to worry about it is equally wrong-minded. So we're not, I don't think we have to be terrified of what's going on, but on the flip side, don't worship the earth either. That let's take care of the earth, but not worship the earth. Take care of the earth so that we're taking care of the people and the earth. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, seems to be the message of Scripture. It's like, yes, this is a beautifully well-designed place. God has done incredible work, and we see evidence of that. Mm-hmm. But let's take our stewardship seriously. And some of these things that, I think we have been a little careless, and it may cost us quite a bit. Typically, the things that cost the most to do are the ones where we've not paid attention and it's accumulated for a long time, mm-hmm. and now it's a lot of work or a lot of effort and resources. And I think it's going to take a lot of effort and resources. To me, the big question is, what kind of people are we going to be? Are we going to be people who just ignore the responsibility, or who worship some aspect or worship something other than God so much that we end up making a different problem? Or are we going to be the people who say, yes, this is well designed. Right. We've got to find what God wants. We've got to manage it the way God wants us. And when we do that, we're going to see great, fruitful, successful things happen that not only take care of the planet, but allow humanity to flourish. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I'm curious how you think about that or respond to that.
That was a good discussion, Jeff. One of the things, this is just my casual observation, not really investing a lot of effort studying, the science behind, climate change and how we might go about mitigating it. And I think the first reaction of humans is to say, okay, if we're causing the problem, we need to stop so that we're not exacerbating the problem, mm-hmm. right? Or we need to do something to correct the problem. I don't see a ton of discussion about how should we adapt. And when you start talking about the costs associated with trying to remove CO2 mm-hmm. and that type of thing, and I'm not arguing that people shouldn't pursue those options, or we shouldn't look at how can we mitigate the damage by, mm-hmm. curtailing the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce, or any kind of other environmental pollutant. I think there's a case to be made that look, maybe what's going to happen is irreversible, and should we be looking at adapting? So instead of having the human tragedy of parts of the coastal area of Florida going underwater and the city of Miami disappearing, New Orleans disappearing, mm-hmm. New York City disappearing, should we maybe start looking at relocating people, from those areas, right? And doing that investment now in anticipation of this is going to come. I think it's naive to think that sea levels aren't going to rise no matter what we do. Right. And can we ever do enough fast enough to prevent it? Or should we not be looking at, modeling for how other areas of the world are going to change in terms of the climate? And, how can we, take that into account and begin to develop crops, mm-hmm. for example, that are going to be able to withstand different conditions, higher temperatures, mm-hmm. Those types of things. So to me, I think I'm not opposed to mm-hmm. mitigation. I'm not opposed to what you're discussing here. Some very clever ideas, by the way. But should we be investing in adapting? Is that And is that something that, involves, I think, our stewardship of the planet, but also, the concern for human life?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a pretty important thing that we do need to consider, because whether this particular aspect is human-induced or not, we do see the sorts of stuff you describe happening on the planet. Now, whether they happen in the human time scale is a different question. But, yeah, you do see sea level rise. And, maybe it is our fascination with wanting the best view that causes us to build high-rises on the coast. But that's just an unwise investment when you understand things over a 1,000-year time scale.
Yep.
And so maybe adaptation is the way to go. I'm curious how you would respond. It's kind of easy for me to say adapt because my home here in Southern California, I'm 60 miles away from the coast. May get a little hotter, may get a little colder. I tend to not mind weather variation. It's a hindrance for me. To the people who live on the island in the South Pacific, their island's going to be gone. It's not let's adapt. Adaptation for me is very minimal compared to you're changing where you have to live type thing.
Well, and that's why, we should be investing the money now so that you're doing it in a controlled, way that's minimally disruptive to people's lives, minimally disruptive to economies.
Right. Okay.
Right. Where.
So in some sense, they're saying, yes, you may have to move off the island, but you've got 100 years to figure out how to do that.
Exactly. Right. Or we got the techniques with genetic engineering, right, to develop crops that could flourish under, higher temperatures or in more arid conditions. So why not, begin to look at, what we project different parts of the world to look like, and can we move agricultural, operations to different regions of the world, from where they currently are to places where we project are going to be, much more amenable to crop production. So, these are not things that you do overnight.
Right.
But, we've got the time and we've got the resources that we could begin to invest in this and mitigate catastrophes that are going to come. But it's human nature to put it off and to put it off, and then suddenly,
No, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with your statement there. Along with that, I also so you talk about, okay, can we adjust where we grow food? Well, think about what that means for the United States. We've got this incredibly fertile area, which now it may be in Canada instead of the United States. It's not just now it's no longer a U.S. question. It's we've altered our capacity to be a player in the world.
Yep.
And now, at least in the United States, we operate under a somewhat common umbrella of what's good for the country, in some sense. Now you've got how you do that. It presumes a level of world cooperation that I think may be untenable.
I don't think I could argue with that, Jeff.
And the point is, it's just a challenge. That's the whole point of that.
Yeah.
So.
But I just don't see any discussion at all.
Yes, I agree.
Towards that end, it's the emphasis that I see are on solutions that I really wonder in the long run are going to work.
Yes.
Right. And
to your point, to emphasize the validity of that point, you're talking about storing things for 100 years. That's the time scale on which we, to the extent this is a problem, which we've caused this problem. So that's not really a long-term solution. That's can we delay the problem until we figure out more later solution? Unless we get like 10,000 years, then that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
So, but no, I appreciate your comments. And I thought it was an interesting discussion to bring up here.
Yeah. But, I think to your larger point, the Christian worldview has something very important to contribute to how we think about this problem, right? And as Christians, are we thinking about this Christianly? Right. Right. And I think our perspective as Christians can really help guide societal efforts towards these lines. So we really need to be thinking well and participating, right?
And even as an individual, if we aren't doing the things that actually will fix it, as a Christian, you still have hope in the midst of that situation.
Very good.
My hope as a Christian is not that things are going to go well. It's that no matter how bad they can go, my relationship with God is still right.
Yeah.
So
great way to end the program. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Star Cells in God. Remember to go to our YouTube channel, Reasons to Believe 1, and subscribe. Also use the notification button so you're alerted when the next episode of Star Cells in God drops, which is every Wednesday. And you can also get access to Star Cells in God on your favorite podcast app. We'd also love for you to go to the comments section under the video and offer your thoughts, your perspectives. We want to hear from you. Remember, check out our website, reasons.org. Follow us on social media, RTB_official. Check out the new RTB app that's coming your way. And then remember this, the more that we know about science, the more we have reasons to believe.